And what he felt were some of the signs of what's going on is the experience, the sense of time speeding up. That it seems that more and more events are happening in a shorter and shorter amount of linear time. There's this kind of compaction taking place. And he talked about how it seemed that there was increasingly kind of a sort of intensification of the psychic nature of reality through things like synchronicities, through events that would sort of violate Newtonian Cartesian kind of principles. Just little light events, almost humorous events that would happen. I mean, he showed these photographs of sheep forming this like perfect circle in Scotland, and stuff like that. He also talked about, he felt that the karmic rubber band was snapping back faster and faster, so it was kind of like rewards and punishments were being meted out at higher and higher speeds. So it was like you could no longer cover up anything. You could no longer escape from the consequences of your actions, which to me was very interesting, because if you think of the word apocalypse, which I would also say, if this hypothesis is correct, this time would be the apocalypse. That word literally means uncovering or revealing. And there is this sense that nothing can be hidden anymore. We can see Clinton, George W., Jr. and Sr., all praying together at the body of the dead Pope, we can just see the sort of ridiculous, overt manifestations of the kind of corruption of the whole system, just so self-evidently now. It's, they don't even try to hide the conspiracy and the cynicism anymore, the way I began to think about it was that, in a sense, it feels that material reality itself is somehow becoming increasingly psychically responsive and slightly less materially dense. How many people feel that those kind of resonate with their experience? Just as And another aspect of it, which I think is really crucial, is the sort of integration of scientific knowledge and kind of esoteric or shamanic wisdom traditions. So that, and this has been like an undercurrent since the 70s with, Capra's book, The Tao of Physics, but that really, and this movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, was another kind of step in that direction. That really, the science can be seen as really supporting kind of mystical or esoteric vision of reality. And it can just be elaborated in deeper and deeper ways. There's one physicist called Amit Goswami, this Indian physicist, who was interviewed in What the Bleep Do We Know, and he's really looking at how quantum physics provides kind of like a roadmap for thinking about reincarnation, like how an individual could reincarnate through kind of like quantum memory. So it just seems like we're on firmer and firmer ground when we, want to stake our claim that there is a kind of spiritual or metaphysical reality. And then also, as we were talking about the other day, Rick Strassman's work with DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which he believed was the spirit molecule. He looked at the fact that, according to the Buddhists, the soul reincarnates 7 weeks after death. And the pineal gland is formed in fetal development 49 days after conception, and that's where DMT is produced. And so he did this whole study on DMT, where if you take DMT, you're shot into this completely alternative dimension, kind of higher dimension of reality. And his thesis is that DMT is this kind of conductive medium that brings the soul into the body. And also at death, like a flood of DMT is released, which causes the life review and the sort of near-death experiences that people talk about. So, there's just a lot of stuff like that. There's this increasing ability to kind of elaborate and establish at least good hypotheses of how science can be integrated with this kind of shamanic perception of reality. So, let's see. So I got more and more involved in studying the crop circles. It really seems to me at this point that it's the most extraordinary, anomalous event that's happening on an incredibly large scale that people are just mostly not capable of paying attention to. And in that sense, it's very much like psychedelics, which, the mainstream culture just totally ignores, or the Times will still call them like toys of the hippie generation. So there's this kind of willful repression or suppression of something that is so super interesting and important. and especially this summer, the crop circles. And I suggest if you want to check it out, there's a website called cropcircleconnector.com, and you can see all the crop circles from this last summer. And a lot of them are very specifically Mayan related, using Mayan imagery, and people have been sort of decoding there seems to be encoded information about certain dates and times in there relating to the next few years. And basically, just briefly, these biophysicists have done studies of the plants and the formations, and have published papers in peer-reviewed science journals that the plants, the way they were affected, would have to be caused by single-point sources of electromagnetic radiation coming from above, because they they do this kind of heliotropism, and they find they create these kind of strange bulbs and other stuff. They've done all this documentation of how they grow after they're affected. And also the hoaxers, the ones who claim to be making the formations, really are not capable of making ones as pristine and precise and amazing as the ones that are unclaimed, for the most part. I mean, there are obviously hoaxing going on, and there are man-made ones, but I think a very significant proportion of them really have no likely cause in human action, as far as we know it. And the whole phenomenon goes on every year, mainly in England. There's about 70 or 80 of them in England each year, and they're just incredibly complex and beautiful. And they seem to be indicating a lot of kind of pieces of the puzzle. And part of it is this kind of integration of science and esoteric wisdom. They'll use fractals. That are based on, esoteric symbols, like the Star of David turned into the Koch fractal, where you kind of elaborate on the triangles. And I actually went to England. And the other thing that became clear to me as I studied the phenomenon, I spent a whole summer in Glastonbury rushing around, like whenever we heard of a new one, we would go that morning and look at it and talk to the farmer whose land it was on, and all the people who were involved with the whole thing, including some people who claimed to be hoaxing. It became clear to me that indeterminacy was part of the nature of the phenomenon, and that actually the phenomenon was very much about conscious intention. Because after a while I began to see that everybody who came to be involved with this phenomenon, what they came in with their set and setting of ideas about it, really structured what they would find. So if they were skeptical and cynical about it, they would find all this evidence that suggested they were human-made, and they would sort of just go for that evidence. If they were kind of New Age bliss bunnies, they would feel like their light bodies were activated, they would see UFOs and angels and stuff like that. But if you had like a kind of skeptical and open perspective on it, or just an open perspective, you would sort of take in all these different levels of information until your sort of whole rational structure just collapsed. So it almost seemed like there was no single cause for some of the formations. And for me, I was like sitting up with it like night after night, unable to sleep after a while, just trying to puzzle out what this thing meant, and was it real? Was it a joke? And finally I got it, that it was very much about indeterminacy and about paradox and learning how to work with paradox, because we live in a very dualistic culture where we always want to go to one side or the other side. We're very quick to want to close off a paradox or feel there's some kind of ultimate solution. And it seemed to me that part of what the crop circles were telling us was to embrace paradox, and to actually, when you find the paradox, to go deeper in rather than seeking to resolve it in some sort of simplified way. So it was definitely like a deep teaching, just exploring the whole phenomenon. And also the other thing that became clear to me is that if they are, which I think they are, manifestations of other levels of galactic intelligence, and probably the star nations that all the indigenous, cultures know about, what they're telling us is that when you get to that higher level of consciousness, you're not, I talked to this guy from the SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and he was like, the crop circles are rubbish. If there were any higher civilization that wanted to communicate with us, they would just leave Encyclopedia Galactica on our doorstep with all the cool technology and stuff. And I was, after a while, I realized that actually, if you reached a higher level of intelligence, you might be more interested in play and art. You might be more interested in subtlety and nuance rather than just some technical manual of space flight. So I think that's what they're telling us. It's like that we have to bring our full toolkit to the table. if we want to reach that sort of level.